After our meeting with the Freys, we sent all the messages we needed to the other side. We wanted to make sure the king and queen had a chance to look everything over and see our proposal, see if they could think of anything else that needed to be put in. Eventually, I realized something was going to happen, something I was definitely not looking forward to. The two sides would have to meet. Thankfully, we wouldn't have to worry about assassinations, especially since we had our wonderful Kitsune girls. Which actually turned out there was even more of them on the other side. The teleportation would bounce us into a different area, a completely different area. All the girls, well, they weren't all girls, all the Kitsune had to actually go into that area to see what area they were jumping into. This would take about a month before everyone was ready, as they wanted to get all their paperwork in order to make sure everything was right. Along with all sorts of correspondence that went back and forth, I informed them that I would be going into this area, as it would be where the buffer zone, if you would say. Consider it like the Trekkie Trek neutral zone. And we would start setting up our base. I would be taking all the prisoners that we had taken on either side, along with anyone, and I mean anyone, that got summoned. This was non-negotiable for either side. And again, the only reason they even listened to this was because of my position as their Grand Noble High Healer, whatever type of bullshit title they wanted to give me. Seriously, just call me Doc. But I wouldn't be the only one. Now we had 3 more, although they were just confused as all hell. The fact of the matter is they were very resistant to the idea of fighting. These are very much pacifists, all 3 of them. They didn't really want to get their hands dirty or bloody. Of course, they really have no idea what that truly means. Regardless of all that, eventually we got to that area, and as I looked across what was left of the village, I simply said, "This'll do." We immediately got to work. Most, if not all, that were working with me were some sort of beast folk. We had our standard Kitsunes, as I said before. We had several dragons, a couple angels, some cat girls, some dog girls. Only a pair of Lamias, which I was surprised, but I found out really quick that having a male Lamia was rare for them. And I mean very, very rare. And even if you found 2 of them, they would immediately fight each other. The hell type of world do they live in? I didn't have time to worry about that. I was just hoping that we would have our wonderful polar bear to show up. And thankfully, Keen did. He actually showed up with a bunch of other engineers, and we were definitely able to get a lot of work done that way. Keen, for as young as he was, he pushed his body to his absolute limit, making what we needed. All sorts of metalwork that he could form really quick. Along with that, the other blacksmiths did what they could, but without the ability he had, they were limited. To my absolute surprise, the other side had not pulled anybody else from his species, so he was one of a kind. Although there was other bear-ish, they weren't polar. Okay, let me phrase this right. All the rest of the bear folk, so to speak, were brown, like deep, dark brown. And he was just, his hair was just solid white, along with his ears. Which kind of perked him up. Apparently, they all looked at him as promising. I couldn't figure out what the hell that was about. Apparently, polar bears are rare, and that made them very attractive in their world. Although he was still really young. I don't even think his balls had dropped yet. Well, I should say, again. And over that month, I would find out this was actually a main reason why many of those that had been summoned to this world just didn't want to fight. It's not as though they were true pacifists in their own sense. The issue was the fact that their small bodies couldn't handle the amount of energy they were pulsing through. It was like trying to put industrial strength electricity through a small house fuse. It's not going to work. If anything, you're going to break something. And in this case, you're going to break a lot of somethings. And it's not going to be fun to watch, especially the amount of screaming. Now, we healers, once we get enough knowledge, it works pretty well. And I would have to work with them because most of them didn't have all that much knowledge in biology. Which stands to reason. I mean, most schools don't actually do that anymore. It's considered some sort of, what's the word I'm looking for? It's gross, and the teachers don't want to do it. Oh, jeez. Yeah, that education is going to be going by the wayside, and real education is kicking in as long as I'm still breathing, which is going to be for a long, long time. How do I know this? I looked into my own genetic code, and I adjusted it. I don't age anymore. And I made sure that those that were human realized that they could do this, but they would have to reach the age of maturity first. If they started screwing around with the ages too much, there could be consequences. I didn't want to say this to the queens that I adjusted because, well, they liked being pretty, and I didn't want to put any type of wrench in those gears. Regardless of that, it didn't take too long before we had enough area built up where everyone was living pretty comfortably, actually. With our abilities, it was able to make all sorts of garden fields. It took a few of our dragons to actually burn down those areas all the way down. Burn the grass, burn the shrubs, in some cases just burning the trees down as they were all sorts of gnarled up. We couldn't do anything with them. And once that was down, it was simple cultivation of the land at that point, which didn't take long, especially when you have somebody, I won't mention who, our wonderful dog girl Reyna, who has an affinity for working with the planet itself and with plants. Just with a simple raise of her hand, she could get plants to germinate about 3 to 4 weeks into their cycle. It was amazing to watch, and I never really get tired of that, which meant we had plenty of food. Along with that, our wonderful cat girls, Meadow and Leaf, thanks to their hyper senses, could figure out where the best protein sources were. They weren't the best of hunters, but it wouldn't take long. Although I did have to actually help them out. Although for this to happen, I really needed Zena's help. Zena's teleportation, being her Kitsune power, I asked her to jump back to the castle and get my duffel bags. This would take 2 trips, and it was a hell of a long jump, so when she got back, I had to, shall we say, work my magic. She was beyond exhausted. We had to make sure she had plenty of food, and I made sure she went to sleep. I told Hana to make sure she was out cold, and that Lamia hypnosis, holy crap, does that work? I swear, better than any sedative I could come up with. By the end of the month, we were finally welcoming the leaders, both kings and queens. They were allowed 1 guard per person. Each of these guards stared each other down and were immediately told to unclench themselves because no fighting will take place here. I expected the talks to take long. I expected all sorts of paperwork to be there. I expected people to put in all their opinions. And I wasn't wrong. Both sides were trying to just salami slice their way up through into my new territory. I told them specifically that these specific lines, in particular, one was a river, the other was a ridge line. These were the borders, and they would end on the east side at one lake and the west side at another ridge line. It was a very, very large piece of land. Several different valleys across, most of which were just rolling hills, but it was still enough for a population of this size. It wouldn't be a problem at all. I demanded, for lack of a better term. I didn't want to sit there and scream at them, but believe me, I truly had to bite my tongue a few times to get them to knock it off. But one of the main things is about halfway through when we took a break, the queen, the original queen that I dealt with, looked over at her Frey counterpart and commented how good her skin looks. It's like she'd been rejuvenated. And when she simply put her hand to her cheek and blushed and, well, basically just pointed at me, more of emotion really, immediately the queen, well, she was all giddy. I'm like, oh, come on, woman, I didn't sleep with you. Why are you giggling like that? That's just creepy. But then again, this is how women are. So I just let it go. A universal truth, women are women, men are men. Deal with it. With this revelation, I actually realized I did have a card to play. I didn't even think about it. I wish somebody had actually brought this up. I had the other 3 healers just to sit there and watch me do this. But I went into each of the kings and I asked them if they wanted me to spice them up. They were confused about this. And I said, do you want to be back to the way you were so that you can hold your woman the way you did? This immediately got their attention. And without hesitation, our wonderful fairy queen said, yes, you will do that now. Jeez, woman, are you in heat? Was all I could think about. With that, I went up to her husband, and he still hesitated, pulled back from me a little bit. So I simply stuck my hand out and waited. He would have to take my hand himself, and I simply stated, I will not treat anyone who does not want to be treated. If they do not want to be fixed, I will not fix them. The only difference is emergencies. And I remember turning and looking at my 3 young healers, and they understood this. They understood it fully, considering originally they were in their 20s themselves. I mean, now they're prepubescent. So, I mean, it is what it is. But they truly understood, as their brains could actually understand this fully. And I needed them to understand it along with our own. With that, the king took my hand. I simply reached up and grabbed his forearm with my other hand, making sure that I had as much contact as possible because this was not going to be simple. At least I thought. You see, I had had so much practice in this, and as anyone knows, practice makes perfect. However, in this case, practice allows you to become much faster. And I mean a lot faster. And I suddenly remember some of the things I used to say with everybody when they were learning a new skill. Don't try to go fast when learning. You learn the basics, and speed comes with time. And I'm like, God damn, I'm back to my old drill sergeant days. What the? Oof. Regardless of that, I ended up going through his DNA, going through to see what was wrong, and I realized that his DNA had designed him to be thin. Very, very thin. Which was pretty common for his species, so I figured I'd juice him up with a little bit more muscle density. Just a little bit. And of course, I made sure that he would be able to hold his woman. I'll keep it PG for right now. And in that case, he would be able to just about make her eyes blow out the top of her head. If you don't know what I mean, put your mind in the gutter and you'll figure out what I'm talking about. With that done, it only took a few minutes, at least to me, a few moments for them. But they could physically see his body getting wider, his shoulders getting more broad, and he seemed to stand a little taller. The popping and cracking of his vertebrae as he realized that what was an issue for him to fly before was gone. He simply stood up, happy, felt himself up to make sure this wasn't a dream, and then he started waving his wings really fast to the point where he actually took to the skies. His wife was amazed because this is the first time he had flown in years. Many times pixies will fly just to keep themselves able to move about, but since they are royalty, they were stuck indoors too much, and eventually they lose the muscle tone, the muscle abilities to actually fly. And as he took to the air, he looked down at his woman, and she was all smiles. Without a hesitation, the human king looked at him and said, "You will do me next," and simply reached out with both hands as though he was going to hug me. I took a step back as I didn't know what the hell was going on. When I did, his guard seemed to be on edge, but he was immediately motioned to calm down. I looked over to his wife and said, anything particular? She giggled, and I knew what she wanted. So I did basically the same thing. I brought him back to the time when he was about 20 years old, but I did increase his muscle density a little bit more. And again, helped him out in the marital aspect of everything. With that, they were all sorts of smiles. And as they realized, as their wives began to feel them up a little bit, and yet I simply sat there and watched for about 30 seconds before and then they realized that their decorum was completely off. They straightened themselves out, of course, and then realized that if this is what I could do to them, they didn't want to ever push this. With that, negotiations went easy. Anything we demanded was ours. Now, I didn't demand a whole bunch of any type of gold, silver, or jewelry. No, only a token amount. But the silver themselves and the gold would not be cast. It would be solid bullion. We would make our own currencies. Reason being is we want to make sure that Keen would be able to make the currency itself. That way it couldn't be forged any other way. How do I know this? It was far too intricate for any sort of casting or any type of stamping to take care of. Along with this, there was only one other thing I wanted, and that was roads. Roads that went into the territories, but only in certain areas, and they must be a certain width from side to side. Everyone was confused about this until I informed them that with the abilities that we have in this town, we are going to become a major hub. We're going to need very large roads for the amount of traffic that's coming through. Of course, they had no idea what I meant by traffic, but they figured it out when I explained that carts are a certain width and they would be passing and all this other fun stuff. And, of course, they fully understood. This was something they had not had to deal with since most of them were, by most definitions, medieval impoverished nations. I mean, hell, they still shit in outhouses. We would be able to handle something other than that. Aside from that, I asked around to everyone else if there was anything else I should put into this. And the only thing I received was that the ladies wanted some trade goods. In particular, they wanted things like silk, anything close to nylon, or anything like that. I asked both sides, and they could both produce such goods. I could understand this. And of course, I wondered if they had things like cleansing products, soap, and that sort of thing. Most of the young ladies, especially people like our Kitsune and our cat girls, were very, very interested in this, as soap would definitely help, along with oils to help, their fur. I didn't see any problems with that, and simply remarked that we would be trading in goods. Not as much gold and silver, but we would be trading in goods. With that, many of them, absolutely as many as possible, they would send. They wanted to trade with us. They wanted to bring up business. They wanted to make sure that we could bring up their civilization even higher because they realized that our knowledge from other civilizations could be formed into theirs. How do you think they got flintlocks and cannons? They could make black powder. It was pretty bad stuff, honestly. It wasn't very well refined, but it did work. Aside from that, they wanted to make sure that they were able to be on good terms with us, as they would be bringing themselves in on a regular basis to make sure they were juiced up a bit, especially royalty. I knew that they would be paying through the nose, and I informed them that the higher the status would create the higher the payment. They started to demand that I do this for free, and I simply stood up above them all and said, "A smart man once said, if you're good at something, never do it for free." Both couples looked at each other and realized that this was a simple truth they had to fully understand. They had to fully embrace. And they did. There was no other issues after that. The territory lines were drawn, and both couples, along with their associated guards, were allowed to return to their homes. It's been 6 months since then. Within that 6 months, we have brought in many crops. We have traded for not only the goods that we wanted, but also things like livestock, other types of foods. It's been really good. I used to live in a shack for 3 months, waiting for the rest of everybody to actually get their own houses built. Everyone looked at me weird when I said that I would be the last one. They figured I would want to be the first. But I stated how a good leader will never place themselves above their subordinates. They looked at me strange, many of them, but, of course, my wonderful humans, they understood. In regards to humans, the only one I'm wishing was still here was Lee. He decided to serve as the new captain of the guard to our original king and queen. I could understand that. It's as close to like the Meiji era, or if I said that right, back when his own civilization was at that point. I'm sure the fact that he's a little bit of a healer himself, he's gonna get a brothel of women that are gonna be after him. Regardless of that fact, I'm just glad that we also got to trade with other nations. As you see, to the east and west, there were other nations. One which was absolutely loaded to the gills with goblins. And not the type of goblins you would think, but actually they're pretty calm. They wanted their own civilization. The only issue for them is they don't produce a lot of males. And the ones that do end up going hunting, and since goblins are, well, small, they don't do so well. In fact, one of them surviving to adulthood is rare, which is why they very much practice polygamy. Needless to say, when Keen showed up to trade some goods, he came back with a really big smile on his face. Wow, you couldn't wipe the grin off that dude's face if you tried. Although having to work inside the smelting plants for a week you would think would knock it off, but no, he was still good. Every chance he had, he would want to go back. Can't say I blame him. I guess goblins got a thing for furry guys with bear ears. Strange, but whatever. On the other side was something I was actually amazed to find. Elves. Now, I had been told that the kingdom was over there of elves, but I figured elves would be on an island or some such crap. Well, they sorta are. It's a peninsula. It's very narrow when it comes to the edge of our territory. And then it reaches out, and then it's a vast island out there. Roughly the size, if I can get my measurements right, about the size of Pennsylvania. That's pretty damn big for a lot of people. And the elves have a type of magic that is very, very close to what Rena has. They were actually surprised at this. In fact, so much so that Rena is now officially engaged to an elf. I was absolutely amazed by this, but I swear that guy just loves walking up and scratching her behind the ears. She does flick her leg. I seriously kept laughing so hard I almost peed myself seeing that one. And all these different things. I knew that our wonderful cat girls would enjoy being able to leap from trees to trees. They sleep most of the day, but they're mostly our lookouts and things of that. Although I did have to teach them how to use that M24. Scopes are difficult to use, but not for folks to have ultra awareness. Although the fact is, I don't think they like shooting things. Not to mention, they really don't like the sound of a 7.62 cracking off. Which I can understand. I mean, they're mostly cat. They're just as much female as they are feline. I just wish they'd stop climbing into my room and curling up on my bed. Even when I'm not there, I show up and they're both just curled up in a little ball. Usually on top of each other, which would be funny, but honestly, usually when I get back, I'm so damn tired I don't want to deal with it. As you know, politics can be a real pain in the ass. And having to deal with constant arguments with people, well, you would think that'd be less of a problem considering we have a couple dragonkin around. When I say a couple, I should say a few. Not only do we have Reniza and Terzak, but we also have her grand uncle, if you want to call that, Zul. I mean, come on. It's just crazy our population is going up. And as I stand here, looking over them, I'm sitting on a hill just watching over, and I realize that things have turned out far better than I deserve. I think of my previous life before they summoned me, when I first started seeing the circle. At that point, my mind was full of all the things I had done in my life. All the bad things I had done. I did bad things when I was a kid. I did bad things as a teenager. It was even worse after I joined the service, and sent to the war, several tours will make you do bad things. I may be a healer now, and usually by the end of the day I got blood on my hands, but they don't realize there's a certain type of blood, no matter how much you scrub, it's never coming off. The past 10 to 15 years of my life, I've actually been looking forward to dying. I was looking for some way to have a good death. But now, as I look out onto the village, I see the children playing, I see the crops swaying in the breeze. And right now, I look over and Renisa is flying over to me, waving with a big smile on her face. All I can think of is, I spent all that time looking for a good death. This is going to be a pretty good life.